All right, so here we are. Welcome back, guys. And if you can't tell, we got the first guest ever on the podcast. And, you got to bear with me here. This is my first time ever doing one of these. I've never even been on a podcast before. So we're all learning together. But today I'm here with somebody who did something very similar to what you've heard me talk about in the past. He dropped out of school. You've heard me ramble on and on and on about how it was a great thing, but there's some bad things, some good things, some hardships with it. Today we got somebody else on that has went through those similar things. And for those people that have DM'd me in the past asking, should I drop out? Should I actually make the leap? Is it time? Should I do it? Should I wait a little bit? We got somebody else on that went through that same thing. So here we go. We got Michael Kaplan here.
Yeah, the pleasure. I'm excited to be on here. Glad I'm your first guest. That's an honor. But so obviously a little bit about myself. I met Joey at school at DePaul when we were both in, I think it was sophomore year when we met. And Joey had decided to, leave school before I had done it. Actually, a little bit before I had done it. And, he's in photography, film, things like that. I'm a real estate broker, so a little bit different career paths. But, I really relied on Joey in a lot of ways to kind of have that guidance and follow in his footsteps in a way and understand what he did to become successful without a college degree and how I could kind of mirror that in my industry now I'm 2 years out of college and just trying to continue to navigate that and make a business out of it. So,
yeah, I think whenever you are considering, doing something of that nature, and obviously we do two different things, but when it comes down to working for yourself, it's scary. And, as you make that transition, for the two of us, whenever you're dropping out of school, if somebody's considering dropping out of school, all of their friends, for the most part, are still going to be in that phase of life where they're still, they're still in college.
Right.
And they still can, do things on a Wednesday night, go get drunk on a Wednesday night. But then you can't necessarily do that if you're trying to work for yourself, because the people that you're, I guess, competing with are now in their 40s, 50s.
Correct.
They've been in it for a while. They're not the same age as you.
Yeah.
And while you can kind of use that to your advantage, it's not an easy thing to do. It's kind of a hard transition to make because, it's all on you now. And you got to almost mature 10 years just in those 2 months of considering to drop out. So how did you kind of make that transition between, being able to be like a college idiot if you wanted to having to work and hold yourself more so to working at least 5 days a week?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing for me, it obviously requires a lot of self-discipline. That goes without saying. But I think you have to really examine yourself and have a lot of self-awareness. Like if you're in college and you're doing stuff and you're kind of like failing out of classes, not because you're not really interested, but because you're being lazy or because you're not dedicated or because whatever one of these reasons are, you're probably not going to be successful dropping out. And that's what I try and explain to people a lot of times when they're thinking about it, because surprisingly, I've had a lot of people come to me, DM me, whatever have you, in situations where they're thinking about leaving school and dropping out. And you have to really just examine the situation for yourself, because there's really two types of people who are going to drop out. And, the one, like I said earlier, is probably not going to be successful in school or out of school because they don't have that drive. They don't have the dedication. But, both of us, I think, were, motivated in school. We were doing the things we needed to be successful in school. And the decision we made was more out of taking a step back, looking at it, and does this make sense, and getting me closer to where I want to be in the most efficient way possible. So I think that's really what people got to understand, because the college degree is not going to make or break you. I think you and I are living proof. There's plenty of people out there that are far more successful than us that are living proof of that. But I think you have to really examine for yourself the why of why you're doing it, and kind of put steps in place to get there, because that's really going to be the deciding factor. It's not going to be the piece of paper that you get at the end of the road.
Yeah, and I think whenever you're considering dropping out of school, there's, like you mentioned, and it was a great point, there's two different sides of dropping out.
Yeah.
There's the people who flunk out.
Exactly.
And then there's people who drop out. And I know for me, one thing that I really struggled with was whenever you're telling people about it,
that's huge.
I obviously there was some hard conversation that I had to have with my parents and things like that, but that's totally different than whenever you're meeting your friend's parents, whenever you're meeting a girlfriend's parents, and you're explaining how this goes, and you're like, okay, I didn't flunk out.
Yeah.
Okay, I had a 3.8 GPA whenever I dropped out.
Yeah.
It was just because for me, in my case, I was already doing what I was going to school for. And like you started doing real estate before you dropped out. If you kind of have a proof of concept, it is a leap of faith. There is something to having that piece of paper to fall back on so that, if my video business hits the fan, if your real estate business hits the fan, you have that fallback to go to.
Right.
But my argument is that after being in the industry for 3 or so years, it's like I could get a job as a creative director. You know? You could get a job at some random brokerage.
Right.
If all shit hit the fan, you can still use your resume kind of as that piece of paper.
Yeah, and if you look at the way, jobs are in place, so you get an entry-level job, and you get that to acquire skills to use at your next job and your next job, right? And that's the same reason you go to college, to acquire these skills to get you into that entry-level job. I look at it as I've been doing real estate now full-time for the past about 2 years. What I've learned in these last 2 years, in my opinion, and I think in most entrepreneurs' opinion, is a lot more enticing to them than what I could have learned in a college classroom, a lot of times by a professor who's never done a real estate transaction in their life or never done photography, whatever have you. So it's like I had to really look at that and understand, like, how am I marketable to other people? I understand I'm not going to be able to go and get a job at Goldman Sachs. That was never for me, though. I never wanted to do that. I always knew in a way I was going to be an entrepreneur. Didn't know it was going to be real estate for sure. I don't know down the line where I'm going to necessarily end up. But I knew that the skills that I'm learning now outside of college, they're applicable to so many different industries. They're applicable in so many different ways that I feel like if I were to go up to, a CEO of a company, maybe not, like I said, Goldman Sachs, but a CEO of a smaller company in Chicago or whatever city, and I say, hey, listen, I made this decision to drop out of school, not out of, necessity, but because I felt like it was the right decision for me. This is what I did in the time that I spent out of school while all my friends were in school. I feel like any entrepreneur or any businessman or businesswoman is going to appreciate that and at least give you the time of day. And if they don't, then honestly, that's on them, because
I don't think that's somebody that you want to be working with either.
No.
Because, as the world moves in a direction of, college degrees mean less, and as it moves in a direction of kind of people doing the thing that's not necessarily normal is being promoted more and more. And you see that with, the different people that are popular on social media. You see that with the different success stories. A lot of people dropped out and became really successful. Yeah. And the people that you want to actually be working with or working for are the people that are like, all right, I buy into you as a person.
Yeah.
You might not necessarily be coming into the company knowing this is how a corporate environment works, but you've worked with all of these different brands, and you've showed me that, you're good at what you do. We can teach you the ins and outs of, the organization of how these bigger companies run, because they do have systems that they run off of.
Right.
But with a camera especially, you can't teach, the eye. That's what everybody always says. You can hand anybody a camera, they can learn how to use it with buttons, but to actually make good content, it's not going to work if somebody doesn't have that first initial drive to do it or that initial gift.
Yeah.
And whenever you are considering dropping out, I think a good point for us to touch on is that do something before you drop out. You know, we both got to a point where we were almost getting overworked, and we were both in school and doing our jobs, and we were like, wow, I'm making this much money doing this cool of work while I'm in school and still having to worry about that.
Yeah.
What could I do if I could totally focus on what I actually want to do every day?
Yeah. That's a really, really great point. And for me, it wasn't also necessarily, the making money, because at the start, like, full disclosure, and anybody who's probably in this position or done real estate, and I'm sure many other independent contractor positions, like, the start is tough. It's a grind. You have to build a client base. You're starting from zero, literally ground zero. So the money you're making really isn't great at the start, but it's having that vision to where it could go is a lot of it. Having that foresight to, all right, this is what I'm making and this is what I'm doing now, but if I continue this for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, is this a sustainable business plan? And for me, I figured that out pretty quickly, that if I would rather take a bet and gamble on myself, because the ROI on that to me is always going to be higher than gambling on a college degree, somebody else. I would always rather put that money and bet on myself than anybody else and put it externally. So that was a huge thing for me. Like I said at the start, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I saw the potential to do that. And also, I was balancing school and real estate and working, and it was like, the competition is so fierce, so heavy, that if I'm doing this part-time, there's no way I could really bring it to that next level. Because, I think there's 20,000 real estate agents in the Chicagoland area, somewhere around that number. If you're a part-time agent and you can kind of show and kind of do it, but you're also balancing school, and sorry, I can't submit an offer because I'm doing calculus too, well, that's all good and great, but your client doesn't care. And your client doesn't care that you can do derivatives. Your client cares that you can get a deal from, contract to close, and that's really what it comes down to. And so, I'm kind of at this point just kind of taking this wherever, but that's the gist of it, right? Like, I couldn't reasonably do it part-time and get to where I wanted to go.
Yeah, and I think I definitely see this in you and a lot of other people that have had success doing their own thing. And I've talked to a couple people about it recently. I suck at doing things that I don't want to do. And that sounds so stupid. Everybody hates doing things that they don't feel like it. But I more so mean, like, how you're saying, like, being 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm all in if I'm really committed to something. And, if I try steering away from the photo and video business and try to become more of a sales guy, become more of a numbers guy, I just don't like it. Yeah. And, I think there is something to that in realizing what you're good at, what you're bad at, and then really going all in on what you're good at.
And this is such a great point. My managing broker at my company, Chris Stevens, he talks about that with me, is like, people like to talk about, what I'm not good at and try and get better at it. That's not a bad idea. But I think really your energy should be directed in acknowledging what you're good at, acknowledging what you're not so good at, and just tripling down on what you're good at and really becoming the best of the best of the best at that thing. Mm-hmm. Because when you try and do a million different things, you end up becoming, kind of mediocre at everything. You know what I mean? So I think that's a really, really great point, and something that, everybody should really take into account when they're, determining what is good for them, what they like, what their passions are, what they're good at, and really just throwing all in on that.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to touch on this more in the next episode, since we're going to record a couple today. But little teaser for you guys, the next episode is going to be all about doubling down on yourself and really committing to that thing that you want to do and not having 1 foot in, 1 foot out, kind of like we touched on this. We'll see you in a couple days. Peace.